Some observers are saying that the new leaders of Ukraine are treating Ukraine as a corporation, selling its assets to another big corporation, Russia. After all, Ukraine is a nation. Do you think something missing here?
Well, the president himself said that he wanted to have Ukraine be a crossroads. He wanted to have equal relations with the United States, the European Union, and Russia. And he needs to carry that out in his economic transactions. There's still lots of international companies wanting to do deals in Ukraine. The EU has said we would probably work with your gas transportation system. We also want to work with your infrastructure. We want you to be able to meet EU conditions. And so the president, I think, important for himself, important for Ukraine, is to keep that balance between those three major groups that he's talked about. And so far, it's not been very balanced, and so the business community is concerned about that. The business community is also concerned. There seems to be a package of legislation now coming down the pike that's not very business friendly. They recently passed in the Budget Act a law which says you have to take your earnings and pay out 30% in dividends. That's not a pro-business act. That's a very anti-business act. That's only a way to squeeze more taxes out of people, but it's in the long run, it's counterproductive. They invest less, they disrupt their business operations, and there's another package which kind of has a generic name that has a lot of small changes in it, but it's all designed to hurt the business community. It's all designed to raise more taxes that are already too high. And so the business community is getting somewhat alarmed about the level playing field between various countries, about the IMF agreement, about VAT tax bonds, and some of these other things about these dividends. So the business community is very concerned as to the next 3, 4, 5 months, as fast as this new administration is moving. How fast are there going to be some more things, and where's going to be some real pro-business, pro-investment, pro the future of Ukraine legislation and agreements coming down the pike?
President Yanukovych was here in Washington not a long time ago, and he promised a lot of business opportunities in Ukraine, and he actually promised to ease the investment climate and to make it more comfortable for U.S. or European investors work in Ukraine. In the same time, it looks like what they're doing is completely opposite. How does the business community look at this situation?
Well, as you know, I introduced the president, and we hosted him. All of our businesses hosted him while he was here to give him a platform to spread his message about the fact that he wants Ukraine to be pro-business. And frankly, Ukraine's not going to come out of this economic crisis just by its own willpower or legislation or the IMF. They need the World Bank, they need EBRD, they need a big chunk of investments from international investments, domestic investors. It takes a whole package to move Ukraine forward. Without the whole package, Ukraine is going to be handicapped and they're going to be hurt and they won't move near as fast. So the president has moved on some fronts, but he's not put together yet the new administration has not put together the whole package, and there are not significant legislation or other agreements promoting the business community, putting more money into Ukraine and new companies coming in, some of the ones that I mentioned. And so the business community is watching very carefully. Where will there be real action? Where will there be real legislation? Where will there be some real results? And hopefully after they've gotten some of these other agreements out of the way, which they thought were necessary for the IMF, then they'll get to individual businesses and the business environment. Because if you take all the rating agencies, they would not improve Ukraine's ratings as in terms of the ease of doing business there yet, based on what's been done. But the business community is still optimistic and still hoping that, and again, we hope the administration understands they got to have a complete package, which includes private investment to go along with all these other things, because in the end, it's the private investors that create the jobs, that create the good jobs, that increase the incomes for people in Ukraine, and they're ones that pay the taxes So he's got to find ways to make it easier to do business, to support private business.
Does it include making reform in Ukraine? Does it include democratic reform in Ukraine? Does it include freedom of the press in Ukraine?
Well, a business community, a private business community where you have private property, the rights of private property, the rule of law, you work under contracts, you work under agreements. They all know that democracy is essential for that. Freedom of the press is essential for that. A strong middle class, a strong civil society, they all go together. You can't have a strong business community, high income jobs, lots of jobs without having all of those other features at the same time. You look at societies all over the world, that all goes together, and it's all essential that it develop together in Ukraine.
And probably last not least question, do you think United States and European officials pay enough attention to Ukraine at this time of change?
There's a lot of people very concerned about that issue, and even Mr. Tibko brought that up when he was here in Washington recently, the Deputy Prime Minister. He was saying that on some issues he hasn't heard enough from the European Union. He's not heard a strong enough voice from the United States. And so he himself was concerned if we maintain this balance that we talked about between the United States, the European Union, and Russia, and maybe the Mediterranean area, if we keep that balance, those countries have got to realize that some of these agreements have lots of long-run implications for balance and for a level playing field in that part of the world. And of course, they can't operate like Russia does, where they can just sign a state agreement and they have state companies and they can just go in, and we can't commit our companies like that. We can't commit our government like that. So there's some disadvantage there. But the business community certainly wants the United States to stay fully engaged and to speak out more on these issues and be more aggressive on economic support for Ukraine, and the same way with the European Union, because we think the European Union is one that should step up to the table, particularly because Ukraine needs to meet those standards if they're going to be an international country, if they're going to move forward economic. They need to integrate more into European standards, European ways of doing business. And the European Union has a lot of clout and has a lot of influence, and we would hope the European Union, with the United States support, would become much more strongly engaged in Ukraine during the rest of this year.
Which kind of risk do you see if the United States and European community would not step up?
Well, Ukraine needs to make some decisions and needs to have partners. And if these other countries don't step up with more economic partnerships, more support, that's going to automatically move them more toward Russia, maybe Eurasia, maybe some of the other countries in the Mediterranean that will try to fill that void. And we already know that Mr. Putin has a whole range of programs in mind for Ukraine. He's talked about partnering with aircraft plants. He's talked about building a nuclear fuel facility, which would be probably at the expense of the American company Westinghouse. He's talked about nuclear waste, which might be at the expense of an American company. And so Mr. Putin is aggressively stepping up to the table, and he's looking at a whole range of partnerships, purchases, joint ventures, etc. And he's probably not going to take any of those off the table until Ukraine says no, or Ukraine says, yeah, but
we have another partner, let's say.
Or let's do it on a very business-like basis, and let's make sure there's co-partners here and not one small partner and one large partner. So obviously Russia has economic power, and they know how to use it, not just for business but for political gain. And it's amazing how many things Mr. Putin has already put on the table, which has been a big surprise to the West, and how fast he's moving to make offers to Ukraine in various industrial sectors that are hurting in Ukraine and probably need some help. So the West ought to be very interested in that and very concerned about that, as well as the international business community, who would like to see, again, balance and a level playing field, and Ukraine move forward working with all these groups and not just with favoring one area.
Thank you so much.